So we've got a question here from Matt, who asks, you recently compared the run-up to the 97 election and the upcoming one in 24, yet Blair faced a very different kind of opponent in Major, a largely pro-European and uncharismatic centrist. Starmer is up against a much more right-wing iteration of the party, which makes his reluctance to speak out against Sunak's policies much harder to understand. The Conservative Party has arguably never been in a more chaotic state. Can we really excuse Starmer for failing to offer a more hopeful and coherent set of policies? So I think the really interesting point here is the comparison between Sunak and Major. We've basically been comparing Starmer and Blair a lot recently, as people tend to. But what about Sunak and Major, Anoosh?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think on the face of it, there is quite a lot of similarity. So neither of them were elected. They both came in after sort of powerhouse prime ministers, if you ignore Liz Truss. Yeah. They are sort of leading a party at a time when it's in a time of sleaze, so-called sleaze. And also they kind of seem like leaders who are managing decline or managing reputation rather than coming in with a big vision or a big structural change to the economy like their previous. So, you know, Boris Johnson did have a different view of how the economy should be run than previous recent Tory administrations. And then Major was coming in after Thatcher, of course. So there is a similarity there. Also, I think Sunak's had his own version of Black Wednesday, even though he wasn't Prime Minister at the time. So that was the mini budget, which has affected people with mortgages particularly, which is, you know, other people are affected too, of course, but politically very significant that people with mortgages have been affected, like after Black Wednesday. So there is a great deal of similarity. But as our questioner makes this point, Sunak is a more right-wing opponent than Major was. I think we can debate this, actually. George Eaton, one of our editors here, has written, I think, numerous times about how Sunak is the most Thatcherite Prime Minister since Thatcher. He would absolutely love that. I think when he was running for the Tory leadership, he was saying he wanted to run the economy like Thatcher. He's been, you know, photographed in her old car. He likes, you know, any Tory leader likes those comparisons, as we've seen. But actually what's really interesting, and I think more relevant than where he is ideologically, is how the public view him. And actually he reads as quite centrist to the public. We did some polling with Redfield and Wilton, who give us polling questions sometimes. And that found that most voters can't tell if he's right-wing. And also most voters see themselves as centrist and see the country as centrist as well. So they're kind of projecting their own politics onto Sunak, but also onto Starmer as well. Most voters felt that he was centrist. Yeah,
probably more accurate. I think there's a contradiction at the heart of Sunak's politics, is that he confesses to be a fiscal conservative who loves low taxes and wants to control state spending. Over the past 2 years, he's been forced to spend billions and billions of pounds, first on that furlough scheme as Chancellor, and now as on the energy price cap, and lots of other things. It's, you know, pensions, benefits, lots of sections of the state have increased under Sunak, which he doesn't profess to want to do. So that's the contradiction at the heart.
Immigration's gone up.
Yeah, everything's
state spending's gone up. Taxes have gone up.
But going back to Major, I think the comparison is extremely interesting. One of the reasons I don't think it necessarily holds up is that Major came after Thatcher and was sort of seen as the manager of her legacy. Sunak's come after Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, all of whom were quite different prime ministers. There's not necessarily as coherent a project of the past 13 years. You had the Boris Johnson rejection, or at least they tried to reject the language of austerity and move back to funding public services and police and that sort of thing. Then we had the free market crash of Liz Truss, and now we've got Rishi Sunak. So there are much more distinct politicians than Thatcher and Major were. And I think that's politically relevant because it means there's less of a sense of, okay, your time's up now. I think that's still there completely, but it's not like the project of the past nearly 2 decades of Thatcherism is up. And I think that's one of the reasons that Rishi Sunak's actually got higher approval ratings. He is seen as slightly different to his predecessors. He's also not been in for as long as Major was in the run-up to 97, so people don't yet know him as well. He's not had that inevitable collapse in approval ratings that happens with politicians over time. So there are some differences.
Yeah, and he's had his ups and downs as well. I mean, you mentioned what he had to do during the pandemic when he was Chancellor. I think he was the most popular politician in the country other than Andy Burnham
just
back
give people
then.
a free Nando's and you're going to be...
Yeah. Maybe he should try that just before the next election.
Oh, God.
The Electoral Commission would love that.
That's going to be a fun podcast.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because what he has done is he has taken the party to the right on certain issues, but he's done it in a way that his style and presentation means the public hasn't necessarily noticed that yet, even though they are very unsettled and disillusioned with the way that the country is being run. He's managed to do it in a way where people still say to you, well, at least he's not Liz Truss or, Boris Johnson really let us down. Yeah. There's not that feeling about Rishi Sunak even now. I think the worst that he gets is that he feels quite weak, someone who's not able to stand up to the issues in his party, but also
not even
in the
right wing,
well.
just weak.
Yeah, not even.
And the other thing on that, which is interesting, is that he's quite successfully managed to use Suella Braverman as the key spokesperson on immigration. I think that's also helped the fact that people don't think he's necessarily as right wing as he is. But it's also, as we've spoken about before, it's also just about vibes. It's about having a suit that's slightly too small for you. It's about having gelled hair. It's about liking Taylor Swift. It's about, for some reason, proclaiming that you're really into technology. All these things sort of add up to point to a more modern politician, someone who's more attuned to the technological revolution, someone who's looking forward, which I think contributes to the perception that he's not as right-wing as he is. Yes,
I think it's the nerd goggles, isn't it?
The nerd goggles.
Yeah. And our questioner wants to know sort of how Starmer should deal with that. It's interesting because I think when Sunak became leader, we were making comparisons between the two men presentationally. Obviously, their politics are very different, but, they both have the gelled hair, managerial presence type thing. Starmer's actually very different, though, isn't he? He's not. There's not the nerd goggles there.
There aren't the nerd goggles. There's the sort of loyally institutionalised establishment goggles. I just wish, Starmer needs to mess up his hair. That's one of the key things presentationally.
I totally agree with that, but I can't believe I'm going to say this on the podcast. I've said it to you many times privately, but he obviously has naturally curly hair, right? When you look at pictures of him when he was younger, he has curly hair and he's sort of forced it down. It kind of reminds me what I used to do when I was in my teens. I used to straighten my hair because that's what it had to look like then. And then you went out and it would just immediately puff up again. And I think he has that slight frazzled,
and to anyone
oily
thinks
look.
We're being frivolous, I would argue that TV now dominates politics, and it's one of the most important things in dictating public opinion is how you just come across on screen. Just to preempt that criticism.
Yeah, I did actually message someone in his office about this. I didn't get a reply.
What, that he needs to change his style? I'm sure they get a lot of that, and I'm sure they love it every time that you give them advice in their presentation, Anoosh.
Please keep listening to this podcast, guys. Sorry. Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.